Hello, we're Group 22 and our presentation is on culturally responsive teaching. One of the major writers about culturally responsive teaching is Geneva Gay. Gay wrote about the importance of making classroom instruction centered around multi-ethnic cultural frames of reference. What is culturally responsive teaching? It is an approach to instructional delivery that centers on the learner, which is culturally centered. This approach to instructional delivery ensures that learners are supported in an environment with respect to their culture. It allows students to relate to aspects of their own culture in their everyday life. It also builds a bridge between the classroom, students, and the culture in which they live. It is extremely effective. Studies show that African American students learn best in an environment that is relational and personal to their lives. So why culturally responsive teaching? There still exists an achievement gap between minority students and Caucasian students. Reasons for this range from teachers being required to follow a mandated curriculum that does not necessarily embrace culturally relevant pedagogy. Teacher prep programs also need to centre their focus on culturally relevant pedagogy. There also needs to be buy-in or commitment on the part of teachers to truly embrace and commit to culturally relevant teaching. Culturally responsive teaching has a long history, with a significantly differing approach than today. English-only pedagogy was a practice in the early 20th century as a way to force Spanish-speaking students to learn English. In the 19th century, African Americans were forbidden from learning to read and write and often had to seek out creative ways to overcome this. An example of this is Mattie Jackson, who would listen to and remember people's conversations, then repeat what she had heard to a more literate black woman who would write it down for her. This began to change dramatically during World War II, when other countries allied against the United States, and the United States wanted to preserve the loyalty of its citizens. Carol Ann Watson Gigio, an applied linguist, anthropologist, and social scientist, was one of the first people to research and publish evidence on the effects of culturally responsive teaching as we see it today. Spending decades working with native Hawaiians, Watson Gigio worked with a number of other scholars in showing the positive effects that culturally relevant examples in learning have on the academic achievements of racially, ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse students. Today, we still aren't taking into enough consideration our students' cultural backgrounds. Testing is still incredibly standardized, and students of color, students from different countries, and ELA students are consistently underperforming on standardized tests. This is a big problem as standardized testing is still relied heavily upon in many contexts. This is only growing as politicians and policymakers demand data-based evidence that students are reaching established performance standards. The need for culturally responsive teaching relies on several premises. Firstly, culture counts. Culture is a dynamic system of social values, cognitive codes, behavioral standards, worldviews, and beliefs that are used to give order and meaning to our own lives as well as the lives of others. Our culture is fundamental to all that we do in education, including curriculum, instruction, administration, and performance instruction. Both consciously and subconsciously, our culture affects how we think, believe, act, and thus teach. Secondly, conventional reform in education is inadequate. Current paradigms and proposals for improving the achievement of students of colour are doomed to failure, due largely to a phenomenon called cultural neutrality, in which we focus on what ethnically, racially, and culturally different students don't have and can't do, as well as claims of cultural neutrality. Thirdly, intention without action is insufficient. Many educators have good intentions about not being unjust and discriminatory. Others endorse cultural awareness. However, intentions alone do not bring about change. As Gay stated, goodwill must be accompanied by pedagogical knowledge and skills, as well as the courage to dismantle the status quo. Fourthly, we must be aware of the strength and validity of cultural diversity. Despite the fact that cultural diversity may not be fully realized in our classrooms, it is the strength that is vitalizing in personal and civic lives. Finally, below standard test scores and grades are symptoms, not causes, of achievement problems. Basically, the scores students receive on standardized tests and classroom learning do not explain why they are learning at these levels. The information on this diagram shows the ways in which culture is dynamic, complex, interactive, and changing, yet a stabilizing force in human life. One large barrier that students face in non-culturally responsive classrooms is with communication. Students of colour who are most traditional in their communication styles and other aspects of culture and ethnicity face greater barriers to educational achievement than their peers, who adhere more closely to white cultural norms. Many decisions about students of colour are based on their communication styles. We need to ensure that we are a culturally responsive education system that doesn't discriminate against different styles of cultural communication and fosters an environment where all students can excel, regardless of their communication style. Communication is strongly culturally influenced, and there are a lot of factors to be taken into consideration in a culturally responsive education environment. Talking and writing are both used for a multitude of reasons, such as conveying information, persuading others, and sharing about themselves. There are a plethora of cultural factors that can affect communication, some of which are listed here on the screen. Gay states that we must be mindful that communication styles are multidimensional and multimodal, shaped by many different influences. Although culture is paramount amongst these, other critical factors include ethnic affiliation, gender, social class, personality, individuality, and experiential context. So, accepting the premise that teaching is most effective when ecological factors such as prior experiences, community settings, cultural backgrounds, and ethnic identities of teachers and students are included in its implementation, what can we do and what are we doing in our classrooms in order to ensure this kind of culturally responsive education? In 2002, the No Child Left Behind law mandated that schools show evidence that they were meeting the needs of all their students. From 1979 to 2005, the number of school-aged children who spoke a language other than English increased from 3.8 to 10.6 million. 42% of public school-aged children represent an ethnically diverse student population, meaning that almost half of school-aged children have had the right by law to get their cultural needs met by the schools they were attending. Although in high-poverty schools, the implementation of a law such as this was not as successful as originally intended, although it did bring to light the challenges of what it is to educate in a diverse setting and how the needs of diverse students need to be addressed. Diversity in curriculum content is imperative for culturally responsive teaching. There are increasing formats in which students receive content, and teachers need to integrate all of these into the classroom. Steps are being made to make curriculum content more diverse, yet these changes are not always improvements. Furthermore, the delivery of the content is as important as the content itself. Lecturers who adopt student-centered, culturally responsive approaches are constantly evaluating and readjusting their teaching and learning practices. Teachers need to choose and adapt content, instructional materials, and evaluation instruments to reflect and respond to the rich and complex diversity of the students they teach. That being said, textbooks are still the predominant teaching tool during classroom instruction. Textbooks dominate all areas of school life, but in particular, some subjects such as math, science, and social studies. Most textbook groups are controlled by European Americans and conform tightly to these norms, so much so that Byrne describes textbooks as cultural artifacts that reflects the values, norms, biases of disciplines and societies, and convey professionally and politically approved knowledge and construct images and impressions that become explanations and understandings for students. We no longer find explicit ethnic stereotypes and racist depictions in our textbooks. Yet our textbooks still give too little attention to topics associated with race and racism, and they're flawed in their treatment of cultural diversity. Similarly, issues of gender disparity are progressing at similar rates to those of ethnic diversity, as in blatant gender roles have disappeared, yet men still appear more frequently than women in textbooks and dominate careers, positions, and images of action and power and leadership. More evidence is needed as to the effects of the implicit biases and underrepresentations in textbooks, yet it is clear that there is some way to go. In creating culturally responsive classrooms, the duty still often falls to the teacher to create and adapt culturally responsive material. This following clip interviews teachers and students about a culturally responsive elementary school classroom.
Are you ready to learn?
Are you ready to learn?
Turn the big brain on.
Turn the big brain on.
Are you ready for college?
Are you ready for college? It's time!
Culturally responsive teaching happens when I bridge the gap between what students learn in the classroom and with what they experience in their cultures and in their communities. The goal behind culturally responsive teaching is that students will develop their own voice and become academically successful, critically conscious forces of change in their communities. But before they can make some type of change in their communities, they first have to see themselves as having the ability to make some type of important change.
How I've changed was, at first, I was actually on a first grade reading level, and now I'm on a fourth grade reading level.
I wasn't a good reader, but I excelled in it, and I became great.
At first, I didn't know my multiplication, but now I do.
And what helped you?
I skip counting and repeat addition. I have to work hard in this class, so when I grow up, when I know enough, I can help people that don't have no home. I can give them food, and I might even start helping people by opening up a shelter.
Because I want to get an education. I want to be really smart, like you, Mr. Lancaster.
The reason why I work so hard in this class is so I can go to college and get my education.
What do you want to do when you grow up?
I want to be a dance teacher.
Oh, really?
I don't waste this opportunity because kids wanted to be in school, but it was segregated, and they did all of that for us so we can go to school.
I worked so hard in this class because I want to become a teacher, but I have to still work hard because if I don't work hard, I don't get paid when I work.
Why do I work hard in the class? Because another person could be in my seat. Some of our big goals in this class are becoming a great leader, going to the third grade, and going to college. What's so important about being a leader is you have to have integrity.
It's important to have great character because in life, like when you go to college, you're gonna have like a hard time, and you have to have a good character because people in college don't tolerate nonsense. Nonsense.
I think that Ruby Bridges changed her community by going to a white school, even though her teacher was white, but her teacher still will help her, and the white people outside will just be mean to her, and I think she made a change because she kept going to a white school. Someone who I've learned about is Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah? What'd he do?
He changed his community so black people can do some things that white people can do.
Morgan is the man who saw the accident with the boogie in the car. So he decided, the solution was, he decided to make signals.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he made important changes by bringing black and white people together.
Thurgood Marshall changed his community by he argued until black people was treated fairly as white people.
People are always just throwing stuff around and never recycling.
I want to fix that. People are getting killed, and I want to fix that by becoming a police or a secret agent.
The problem I see in my community is most black men killing other black men. And how I can help change my community by to tell them not to kill black men or women.
I want to help by telling people to do the right thing, and I want them to be inspired by me because I can show them the way and leaders show others the way.
Multicultural scholars argue that immersing students in their culture by espousing culturally affirming teaching practices develops children who see themselves as cultural workers and leaders. Although there is a lot of staggered evidence surrounding the effects, nonetheless improvements have been shown when educating children who are culturally and linguistically diverse. A critical component of this review is not just ascertaining whether the reform improves academic achievement, but also whether it allows for learning to be channeled through the cultural reality and experiences of the learner. Ladson-Billings argues that teachers and schools must first believe that all students can succeed, maintain an affirming student-teacher relationship, and believe that assessment must incorporate multiple forms of intelligence and excellence. Fostering this perspective helps the establishment of confidence and sets the tone for the learning environment that involves culturally relevant pedagogy that connects learning and classroom experiences to the learner's home discourses and experiences. Connecting the homeschool discourses and experiences fosters the argument that doing so can improve the long-term educational outcomes and reverse the trend of historically low performance of diverse student populations, encouraging schools to view learning through the lens of a child. Louise Derman-Sparks and the ABC Task Force define tourist curriculum practices as those that patronize and trivialize a group of people. Giving learners a lackluster, trivial cultural engagement that is unrealistic rather than the real-life experiences and everyday realities that people from different cultures capture. Multicultural scholars argue that immersing students in their culture by espousing culturally affirming teaching practices develops children who see themselves as cultural workers and leaders. Although there is a lot of staggered evidence surrounding the effects, nonetheless, improvements have been shown when educating children who are culturally and linguistically diverse. A critical component of this review is not just ascertaining whether the reform improves academic achievement, but also whether it allows for learning to be channeled through the cultural reality and experiences of the learner. Ladson-Billings argues that teachers and schools must first believe that all students can succeed, maintain an affirming student-teacher relationship, and believe that assessment must incorporate multiple forms of excellence. Fostering this perspective helps the establishment of confidence and sets the tone for the learning environment that involves culturally relevant pedagogy that connects learning and classroom experiences to the learner's home discourses and experiences. Connecting the homeschool discourses and experiences fosters the argument that doing so can improve the long-term educational outcomes and reverse the trend of the historically low performance of diverse student populations, encouraging schools to view learning through the lens of the child. Louise Derman-Sparks and the ABC Task Force define tourist curriculum practices as those that patronize and trivialize a group of people. Giving learners a lackluster, trivial cultural engagement that is unrealistic rather than the real-life experiences and everyday realities of people from different cultures being captured. As Eurocentric ideals are at the foundation of American education, the need to negate these traditional ideals that were not made taking into account a diverse student population is of great importance. It is necessary to stray from unrealistic expectations that a diverse population of children have the ability to connect and thrive in an environment that doesn't incorporate their culture. Culturally responsive teaching serves to increase student motivation, enthusiasm for learning, and academic achievement. This diagram shows a framework for culturally responsive teaching called Ready for Rigor, which was developed by Hammond and Jackson in 2015. This is a holistic model which is very interesting as it challenges the everyday teacher to get to know their learners in an extreme way and in a way that engages them on more than a simply academic level. Deborah Harmon says that one of the greatest outcomes of experiencing culturally responsive teaching is a sense of empowerment. Currently, there are not enough attempts at culturally responsive teaching. However, as Gay stated, small steps towards culturally responsive teaching are better than none. It is necessary that more teachers are recruited and trained with the knowledge and skill set to deliver culturally responsive lessons. Culturally responsive teaching can create increasingly positive, appropriate, and relevant classrooms. Furthermore, it can empower students and teachers improve motivation and outcomes amongst minority students, and create a rich environment both inside and outside the classroom. It's imperative that educators and policymakers endeavour to ensure provision of culturally responsive teaching. We live in a multicultural society, and as we become increasingly aware of the necessity of cultural awareness, it is an obligation to move towards culturally responsive teaching in all of our classrooms. To deny that is to deny the importance of our individual students' culture.